Joining us now, the author of a book with as good a title as you can come up with. Texas Tough, The Rise of America's Prison Empire. The author is Robert Perkinson. Robert, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
First of all, let me start with this. Does any other country in the world lock as many people up as the United States?
No, not even dictatorships like Iran or China or any others.
So not even places with political prisoners. They can't even keep up with us.
They can't come close to the aggregate numbers. We have about 2.3 million people behind bars on any given day in the U.S., not counting those under criminal justice supervision. And so, it's more than any government in the history of democracy.
Now, I'm going to presume from reading about the book that the answer is not, well, we just have the most criminals.
That's exactly right, and of course that's what most people think, but it's not true. There are plenty of places, even with higher crime rates, that incarcerate a smaller portion of their population.
So how did this come to be, that we became this sort of prison or prisoner factory?
Yeah, well, I originally looked at crime rates, but it turns out over the long term, there's very little correlation between crime rates, which go up and down over the decades, and incarceration rates, which do as well, but independently. Instead, I found that the incarceration rates are really an animal produced by politics. And as our politics have become increasingly divisive and dysfunctional, and as the right has gained power in the post-civil rights, post-Great Society era, they have used crime as a wedge issue in elections, that our statutes have changed, and that's what's really responsible for just breathtaking rates of growth and incarceration that are now devouring huge amounts of resources and doing very little, most experts think, to protect the public.
But wouldn't our situation, crime-wise, be more dire if we didn't lock up as many people?
Yes. I mean, there is some, if you lock up tons and tons of young people, nonviolent and violent offenders alike, you will cut crime some. And crime has been going down since the 1990s in the United States, and most experts who've looked carefully at all of the variables think that about 10% of that decline, maybe as much as a quarter of that decline, can be explained by the astronomical amount of money that we have spent building prisons and keeping people in cages. But not most of the decline. Most of that has to do with larger macroeconomic and social and cultural factors, we think. So you do get some bang for your buck in locking up some criminals, very little bang for your buck locking up senior citizens, marijuana users, low-level drug offenders of the sorts that are now packing our prisons and jails to the gills.
Robert, Cenk, you got a question?
Yeah. What are we supposed to do with them, I guess? I mean, look, I guess if you say to me, let's not arrest the marijuana users, I couldn't agree more, because I think it should be legal anyway. And but like, if somebody commits a crime, we got to put them in jail. I mean,
the marijuana thing is no small matter. I mean, there's about 1 million marijuana arrests in the United States every year, so it's significant. And the low-level drug offenders with harder drugs is significant too. I mean, you would cut the prison population by hundreds of thousands, and thereby save billions of dollars if we had a treatment orientation rather than a punishment orientation, as most other countries do, and as the United States did until
and why do you think that is?
The Nixon administration.
Why do you think we're locking these people up? Do you think it's for gain? That somebody makes money off of locking up people smoking pot, and then that's
there's
why
a little bit. There's a little bit of that. There's a little bit of for-profit prison companies that make an extra buck by kicking lobbying money into hardline campaigns to strengthen penalties of all sorts. In fact, there's a lot of evidence now surfacing that private prison companies were involved in passing the Arizona immigration legislation. But no, I think instead what I found is that it's really related to politics. And in a nutshell, it's this, that as the Southern right was defeated on segregation in the 60s, they turned quite cleverly to crime as a kind of divisive issue to motivate their base and to re-establish their legitimacy. Richard Nixon is the first person who figured this out successfully nationally. He used crime as a way to kind of talk about race, to tap into racial resentments without being overtly racist in the vein of George Wallace and so on. And Democrats, in a way, played along by protecting their right flank by trying to be just as tough as the right. And the result is that every legislative session, starting in the South but spreading out to the rest of the country, in every state across the Union, politicians tried to take home a tough sentencing statute, get the drug pushers, get the child predators, get the murderers, curtail parole, back to their constituents so that they could, posture as the frontier lawmen. And the results have been pretty disastrous, and in some ways have rolled back a lot of the gains of the civil rights movement because they're so racially divisive.
Well, a couple things. I want to know how they were, how they're disastrous, but also from a political point of view, though, you would admit, though, it's been pretty effective.
It has been. So yeah, you got to hand it to them.
How
but
is it,
it would be nice.
Let's go to the other issue then. How has it been a disaster?
Well, it's been a disaster because we spend, in a period of scarce resources, we're spending about $70 billion a year to lock up these 2.3 million people. It's incredibly, we put them into cages and then release them back out onto the streets a few years later, angrier, more alienated, less employable than they were before. So it's damaging to them, their families, and their communities. We don't think it does a very good job of protecting the public compared to other ways of devoting those resources, from education to better policing. So it's wasteful, dysfunctional government with, it's not just flushing dollars down the toilet, but it's actually devoting dollars to cause harm to society.
Would more police or more police and better policing, and what kind? Would I take it that experts like you would believe that helps?
There's a whole variety and a whole variety of smarter rather than just tougher solutions to crime.
Well, you mentioned the police, and that's why I brought that
up.
Yeah,
well, and they could appeal to both conservatives and liberals. On the conservative side, better deployment of police resources, more community policing, more surveillance, better hardening of soft crime targets. Instead of having huge amounts of police resources devoted to low-level drug stops, instead of incentivizing police departments to maximize their number of narcotics arrests to qualify for federal money, encourage them to go after bigger dealers or bigger criminals. That would make a difference. And on the liberal side of the spectrum, there's all sorts of stuff you can do. There's great evidence that preventing child abuse decreases levels of juvenile delinquency, improving educational attainment and graduation rates decreases crime, improving safety around public housing decreases crime. I mean, so all those old-fashioned LBJ-style Great Society solutions, those are great. Those are good crime solutions too. And the benefit is they also benefit the public at large.
Yeah, of course, and that's from a framing point of view, that's a little what frustrates me, because of course, and I don't blame you for this, but it comes up in that conversation. It's just when you were talking there, it appeals to conservatives for the more cops, and the liberals because of the sort of vague education issues. Whereas, I'm for competence, and I'm for a smart allocation of resources, and who wants hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars spent on getting low-level drug offenders so that police departments can show the rise in narcotics arrests and then get federal funding? That's not conservative, that's not liberal, that's just stupid.
I agree, and that's really the point of my book, is to argue that this really is stupid, and some conservatives, I think, are coming around to realize that this mass incarceration is actually big government at its worst.
Right.
It involves curtailment of individual liberties of people who we really shouldn't think of as criminal. That every time you pass a sentencing statute, in a way, it's an entitlement program that devotes taxpayer resources someplace that it can't go elsewhere, and there is some traction on that, but so far we haven't, and we've seen some tinkering around the edges. Some conservatives now are starting to sober up from the prison binge and realize how much money is being spent here, and they're reconsidering reforms. Others
I would
so
have
far aren't.
I would have a tough time believing that they're going to give it up as a wedge issue. But my last point regarding that is that, I mean, conservative, liberal, we all want criminals to be, we all want real criminals caught. We don't want to waste resources. We all agree on that. And, you know, even the stuff you mentioned, like around housing projects, who's going to argue against safety around housing projects? I mean, I don't even think conservatives are going to do that.
Well, the problem, as we all, as increasing numbers of people in the country realize, is that, you know, a lot of the way the government, the country is governed right now is not decided by reasoned argument and the kind of most sober consideration of the facts.
Yeah, really?
It's determined by, you know, who can craft the sharpest attack ad and who can frame the issue before the public most effectively, regardless of its connection to the truth. And in a way, the crime wars of from the Nixon administration through the Reagan administration, and in some ways culminating in the Clinton administration, previewed the sorts of know-nothing debates that we have seen really metastasize
Bill Clinton,
across our issues.
Robert, Bill Clinton is given a lot of credit for putting more 100,000 cops on the street.
He has, but if you look back at those crime bills that he passed after he lost the midterm elections, like Obama just has, they did put more cops on the streets. They did improve policing. They did have money for after-school programs and some liberal programs. But if you counted up the dollars, the lion's share of the dollars in those huge crime packages, $30 billion if memory serves, one of them in 1996, almost all of that went to increasing incarceration.
It's just
so it was a compromise without compromise, but an unprincipled compromise in the end, that one that was really damaging more than helpful.
I've got another question. Out of the 2.3 million people we've got incarcerated across the country, first of all, is that an aggregate number of federal and state and
yes.
local? And then, second of all, what percentage of that, or how many of that, is for drug offenses?
Well, about half of it, a little less than half of it, is for nonviolent offenders. Although most people who go to prison every year are nonviolent offenders, but because violent offenders stay there longer, they occupy a little more than half of all the beds in the country.
They occupy a little more than half? Nonviolent offenders?
Violent offenders occupy a little more than half of those 2.4 million beds because they stay there for so long. But if you count up all the roughly 650,000 people who go into prison every year, most of them are going in for nonviolent offenses. If memory serves, it's about half of those or so that are exclusively drug offenses.
A couple of quick questions to wrap this up. First of all, just let me say, as a lifelong liberal, progressive, one of the things that drove me crazy and still makes me angry, is the notion that that I'm soft on crime. Because I don't, honestly, other than not supporting the death penalty, I don't know how to be tougher. You know, I desperately want bad guys to go to prison, and I don't want them to get out. The question becomes, most relevantly, okay, so who's a bad guy? Like, if we can identify the bad guys.
Well, yeah, and that actually is that's a good point. We would one place where I think we should probably be spending more criminal justice dollars is on indigent defense, because DNA testing has now revealed to us that there are a heck of a lot more innocent people going to prison than we thought, and our supposedly adversarial justice system has really become an assembly line, plea bargaining justice system, and a whole lot of people are getting swept deeper into the system of incarceration who probably shouldn't be there. So if people really had adequate counsel, I think we would dispense more equitable justice, and we would shrink the size of the prison population and save money in the long term.
You mentioned
the Obama administration has been looking at that, but who knows how far they'll get.
I'm sure they'll get right to it. Texas Tough: The Rise of America's Prison System Empire is the name of your book. So just real quickly, you mentioned the DNA, Robert. When George Bush, as governor of Texas, says that he's confident that Texas executes like 3 or 4 people a day, that George Bush says that he's confident that they never executed somebody who didn't do it. What are the odds that that's true?
Oh, pretty close to 0.
Yeah, that's awesome. Right, he's like, but he's positive.
And Governor Perry, you know, actually a guy who I corresponded with, Cameron Todd Willingham, was almost certainly innocent, executed under the watch of Governor Perry.
Yeah, I just read about him. Yeah, the guy was almost certainly innocent.
And when he was about to be exonerated posthumously, Perry fired the whole Forensic Science Commission and appointed cronies to cover it up.
I know,
rather than do something about it.
It's mad. That in and of itself was reason to elect Bill White over Rick Perry.
Yeah,
but of
sadly,
course that
he
didn't
seems
happen.
to be governor for life.
So give me in 30 seconds or less, if you can, Robert. When I work for Turner Classic Movies, and I was recently watching again one of my favorite movies. I Was a Fugitive from a Chain Gang, directed by Mervyn LeRoy with Paul Muni, and you know, it's got those barbaric chain gang, the old depictions of chain gangs in the 20s, 30s, 40s, and I guess into the 50s that we had, that we think we have reformed. Is that too far off from the way things have returned, or have we gotten rid of that?
No, sadly, in prison history, it's far too easy to confuse chronology with progress. I mean, we have gotten away from some of the brutal physical abuse of prisoners that you see in a movie like that. But our system is sadly more merciless now, probably more spirit-breaking now than it has ever been, because people are held on the supermax side of the system in such conditions of isolation that increasing numbers of judges are saying that they're just incubators of psychosis. The sentences are so long. People are going to prison for such minor crimes compared to how they would be punished in previous eras of American history or in other countries, that I think our system is meaner and harsher now than it has ever been, and probably has ever been since the period of the Great Hanging in the height of the British Empire.
All right. Well, there you go. Robert Perkinson. The book is Texas Tough: The Rise of America's Prison Empire. That was a great conversation, Robert. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks. It was great talking to you.